Thank you.
Is your cold open? Um,
I could
welcome
show her.
back.
She looks really cute right now.
Circling Seattle sports. This is a new show we're doing for the Washington Husky women's basketball team. Uh, Again, I don't have a name for it quite yet. I'm sure we'll figure it out. It might just be for the first week, the UW women's basketball show. Of course, joined by Rowan and Bella, both you've already seen before in a myriad of ways. Bella, most recently in our Right as Rain show, and obviously a major, you know, the factor for players and puppies. And then Rowan, at least in ties to this, I mean, you see Rowan with our Storm Round Table, a bunch of other things. Rowan has shot a bunch of the photography wise, the UW women's basketball games over at CSS. Bella has been at just about everyone for the next. So these folks know what they're talking about. I'm just kind of here, even though we've been in every game this year. Um, this is an interesting Husky team. I think I'll start with that. Just the past week was nice. I know Bella and I had a strong eye on the Penn State win on the road. That was nice to see after UW's had some struggles on the road to begin their Big Ten tenure this season. And then a tough loss to 16th ranked Maryland last night. Yes, last afternoon. Uh, and just kind of a game of runs. Yeah, we'll start with that before we talk about sort of their faring against ranked teams. This is a Washington team that, you know, uh, obviously is trying to make the NCAA tournament for the first time since Kelsey Plum left. They're still trying to do that. They're in Tina Langley's fourth year at the program. It's their first year in the Big Ten. We're getting to the nitty gritty. Bella, I'll start with you. I know Rowan was there as well, so Rowan, you can pick up right after. What did you think of the past week? Obviously, it's kind of easy to break them down into a win and a loss because it's just two games. But I don't know. We're kind of at this time where these games, all obviously they all matter, but you're playing a lot of good teams. You'll play a bunch of good teams coming up to close the year out. And this matters, whether it be for seeding or for if you want to be in the tournament or not. So just your thoughts on the past week, Bella.
Yeah, I think, first of all, important to mention that the Big Ten tournament does not automatically enter all 18 teams
Yep.
in the league. So just beyond the NCAA tournament, they have to have enough wins to be one of the top 15 teams in the Big Ten to be just in the conference tournament. I think they've been pretty good so far about beating the teams that they should beat. I'm thinking
Purdue,
Penn State,
Penn State.
Purdue, um, Wisconsin, Illinois, the teams that are below them in the standings. I think at the same time, if they do want to make the NCAA tournament, they've got to beat some of those teams that are above them. I believe it was on the Penn State broadcast. The announcers were talking about Charlie Cream having Washington as like a last four into the tournament, but really missing what commentators usually call a signature win. They haven't really, they've been really close, but they haven't pulled off one of those wins that proves that they can beat a top team and that makes them interesting to put in the tournament. I think that's something that we really hoped would come from Maryland, from the Ohio State game at certain times. Obviously they still have other opportunities to get those wins, particularly in the tournament. USC is coming up, but that's a tough one. Particularly just because they just don't have the same size as USC. Um, so I think I mean, they've been good. They've been interesting, but at the same time, last year they pulled off a couple of upsets and they haven't managed to do the same this year. So I'm not really sure what the difference is this year from last year, where those ranked wins aren't really coming through. But I do think we're starting to see a little bit more of all of the players having good nights at the same time. I think we had a lot of games where, they won and Eldine went off for 40, but like no one else really scored. Or Savia would score 30 and no one else would really score. Now you're having nights where Elle scores 20, Savia has 15, Delia has 15, Hannah Steins contributes a solid 10. And I think you need more of that balanced scoring in order to get some of these wins. And I think it's really important, particularly, I mean, Oregon has been ranked at a couple times this season. I think it's really important to try and get a win at Oregon, try and beat Rutgers at home, beat Nebraska on the road if you can. Minnesota's a tough one, but I think you really have to, at the very least, make sure you beat those teams that are below you or close to you in the rankings. Otherwise, they're simply not going to make the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's hard to it's hard to be remembered for getting close to upsetting teams and not actually pulling off the upset. And that feels like what's happening right now. Like, I wrote a little log down just because in my head I was like, they've been so close to all these ranked teams, lost to these, this is at the time what they were ranked, lost to LSU, number 7 LSU by 1, number 1 UCLA by 11, but it felt a lot closer. I think at the end there were some foul shots there that made it, a bigger margin. Number 20 Michigan State lost by 12, number 8 Ohio State lost by 10, and then yesterday lost by 8 to number 16 Maryland. And it's like they just are getting so close, but they can't quite do it. And I was talking before we recorded about how I felt like in that Iowa game, which I don't think any of us really want to talk about because how rough it was, but I'm gonna bring it up. I'm sorry, I'm gonna bring it up. I think two things, like that game to me really put on blast kind of what the issues were. One thing I think was they had a look there at the end. The Huskies had a look there at the end with Iowa. They just looked really terrible. And then there was a little bit of momentum there. And when that momentum came, it felt like it was through their defense. And I felt that way yesterday as well. They were down by a lot and they made another run just from their defense, and the arena loved it. I loved the energy yesterday, but same thing with Iowa. I felt like it was just a little too late that they made those defensive adjustments, and I think that they did it a lot better yesterday against Maryland. But then I honestly don't really know what happened at the end there. It was just like they did make those adjustments and made a run, but they couldn't quite, just felt like that end of game play calling was just a little rough. They had that weird moment where I think they didn't realize which basket was theirs, that the Maryland player got an easy layup, whatever. Anyway,
Yeah.
I think those defensive adjustments were huge at that point in the game. Their press has been great for them. Savia Sellers specifically, great defense. Delia Daniels, great defense. And then also with Iowa, I think the other thing I'm thinking about that is one of my issues with how UW is doing right now is just their post presence right now. I think that Delia is obviously tall, probably their best, big on the team, but I think that they like to use her a little bit more on the high post than on the low post, and especially yesterday you saw her kind of shying away from the low post a little bit, and because she can kind of do both, she can shoot the three, she, not all the time, but she can shoot the three, she can get to the basket, all of that. Then it kind of leaves this gap in the post that it feels like no one at this point is filling. And at the Iowa game, Addison O'Grady just killed UW on the post. And it's like, if you have Delia who's a quick defender, and so she can defend some guards, she can defend some forwards. I just think that the post presence is really where they're lacking a little bit right now. And yeah, so anyway, going into the postseason, especially, that's going to be a huge problem because you're just going to keep matching up with bigger and bigger teams. And yeah, so yesterday I thought was a good, it was a really, I think that they came back in a really strong way. I think they found that momentum that wasn't quite enough, but I think it was a good adjustment from Iowa that I like that they didn't completely lose it and just said, no, we're done. We're not even trying anymore. And they actually made some effort to earn it back, and they did. They still lost, but it still was good to see that they kind of persevered through that, I guess.
Yeah, watching the Maryland game, I felt like they got the defensive stops they needed and they got a good look on offense, but the buckets didn't fall.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Hmm.
they were so close, but they couldn't get the scores
Yeah.
right when they needed them. They had gotten them. They had gotten like that 12-0 run in the last quarter, but like right when it came down to crunch
Hmm.
time, they couldn't get those scores even when they got the defensive stops. And then you're right, there were a couple of those like miscommunications on defense
Hmm.
where I'm like, what the heck happened? Why was that such an open layup? But like it feels like that's kind of a theme. Like same with the LSU loss, right? Like they were ahead that time.
Oh,
Hmm.
But like I mean, even I think like I think a similar thing happened in the Ohio State game. They were kind of pushing towards the end, but then they couldn't when they got the stops, they couldn't get the
Yeah.
buckets on the other end.
Hmm.
And stops are great, but if you're not scoring those crunch time buckets, then you're
And the
not.
and the shot selection was a little odd too. I'm just remembering like that I think it might have been honestly the last time that they had the ball in the Maryland game, El Ladine, it looked like they just were always trying to set her up for the three and then it wasn't there. So then she just kind of dribbled around and she made it happen, but that's a
oh
lot of
yeah.
seconds on the shot clock that I'm like, yeah, it just feels like I mean, I think it's a really good idea to go to L for the quick three. She's been a great she's been shooting great for them, but it kind of feels like maybe some better late game plays to kind of have in your back pocket for those moments. So then the other team isn't anticipating that they're just going to go to L like they have been, it feels like.
Yeah, was it the Indiana game where they were looking for like a last second bucket to tie it up and the
Mm.
shot they ended up getting was Steins at the top of the arc
Oh,
and
and she had made a
like
three that day.
she hadn't made a three that day and she also was like fading away to the side. It was an incredibly tough shot and that was after they like messed up getting the rebound and calling a timeout so they couldn't advance the ball.
That's right.
Um, and so then they had to like throw it full court. It got knocked out, so they were kind of lucky that they then had it closer and then could make a different play call. But even then they didn't get that shot. And if you compare it to LSU, right? Like they got that game-winning shot. They got that shot that mattered. And I think that's something, at least recently, that has been kind of separating
Yeah.
Washington from the other teams is they'll play well during the game, but then when it comes down to like finding a game-winning shot somewhere, they're just not quite there yet.
Hmm.
And I think,
Yeah.
maybe I think that game was a frustrating one because I think Savia Sellers had fouled out and she was the only one who had really been shooting well. And so it was kind of difficult in terms of who was going to take that shot against Indiana. And Savia talked after the last game about the foul trouble and she's getting a bit better about managing it. Um, but you know, you need you need to hit those game-winning shots. And
Yeah.
obviously it's easy for us to say that those are incredibly
Right,
tough
right.
tough shots to hit. Those are incredibly difficult things to do, but that does feel like a lot of what's separating is like that end game execution on both ends
Yeah.
of the floor. They're
Yeah.
getting it on one end of the floor, but they're not getting it on the other end of the floor. And then in terms of I wanted to what you said about the post presence,
Mhm.
I thought it was really fascinating against Ohio State when they just went for the four guard lineup straight up because Ohio State doesn't have a ton of post size.
Mhm.
They've got like big players, but they don't necessarily have the most established posts. And you wanted ball handlers because of Ohio State's full court press that runs the entire game. And Tina Langley talked about wanting to be quick. And I think that has been kind of when UW has looked some of its best is
Mhm.
having four guards plus Delia Daniels, who at times, like, I
Like,
think one of her biggest strong suits, particularly like again in the Ohio State game, her passing out of tough situations, her composure when she has the ball and she's got players on her, she can find the pass to break the press. Whereas when Tyra Eke was in a couple different times, she got the pressure on her and she threw it away. And it's a tough thing because obviously, you're a post player, you're not necessarily used to being in the middle of the floor and like needing to break a press. Um, but I think because it's tough because there's been some games where I really think Tyra's offensive production has been really important.
mhm.
She's got some great low post position, she's got some great buckets, and she's had some good defense as well, but it hasn't been consistent enough, or they've just been a little too undersized, a little too outstrengthed in some ways. And
Mm,
then as soon as Delia or Tyra pick up 2 fouls, then they're in a little bit of trouble and they can't play as aggressively, which always seems to affect how effective they are. Um, and so I do think, like, particularly, I think, like, I'm thinking USC, Rhea Marshall and Kiki Uriafen, like, what is UW going to do? Because those, you need post players on those players. I imagine Delia guards Kiki, just because they're kind of similarly athletic and quick, and
Mhm.
Tyra's on Rhea, but those are really good rebounders, and you have to keep them off the boards. You have to keep them out of the low post. And can UW do it enough to win? Because I mean, obviously Lauren Betts, right? That I mean, Lauren Betts has been a
yeah.
problem for everyone because no one else has a 6'7" player really this year except for TCU, and I don't think UCLA has played TCU. But like, Lauren Betts had 20
23.
hot, yeah, she had a lot of
Yeah.
points
Yeah.
against Washington, and she was basically unstoppable.
I mean, and I was looking, I haven't looked at, I haven't rewatched that to remember exactly, but I did see that that was the most minutes that Tyra Eke has gotten all season was against UCLA. And I think she had 35 minutes. So if I'm remembering correctly, she was on bets. I can't
Yeah,
really, yeah, okay. So
yeah,
I
she
was gonna say.
was.
But yeah, I mean it's like those post matchups just are really not not working for them. And again, Addison O'Grady and Lauren Betts. And yeah, you bring up a really good point with the people that are to come, I guess, with yeah, with Marshall and Uriah Fenn, who I keep forgetting that they have changed how they want us to pronounce her last name, and so I keep forgetting. But I was gonna say something about with Iowa. I think what's interesting too is if you're looking at the leading rebounders, despite not having as many minutes and her minutes going down, the two highest rebounders for Washington are still Delia and Tyra. And
Yeah.
I think something that, like, I don't know if inspiring isn't really the right word, but something that I really liked about the Iowa game was I was so impressed with the way that their guards are just they were all over the rebounding. And I think that that's something that I don't see as often from Washington. Like, it's just, I think that when you have posts that are so focused on, or when you have someone like Tyra Eke who's so focused on trying to stop her player defensively, then that rebounding kind of goes out the window. And I think that sometimes the it would be better if some of the guards could focus a little bit more on getting those rebounds and really running in there, because it just seems like there were just so many rebounds in the Iowa game that just felt so just ridiculous that Iowa got. It was just like it's the ball is right there. So I don't know. It's just, yeah, the post issue is an issue for sure.
No,
I
the
need to jump
rebound.
in here because we have a time crunch and we've been on this
Oh,
for like 20 minutes.
Wait, but can I make a point about the rebounding?
yes.
Okay. But again, we have other shit to talk. Oh, well, I used my swear word and we're running on the time crunch.
Here's the thing. I think we can talk about whatever we want. But the thing I remember Tina Langley talking about after the LSU game how the team put a lot of effort into the guards rebounding in particular.
Mm,
And that led to the UCLA game where Washington was the first team all year at that point to
yeah.
out
Ah,
Oh, that's a
rebound
huge point. Yeah.
UCLA. And so they had a good like 5 game stretch, I want to say, where the
Mm,
guards were rebounding really well. And that was like actually a strong suit of theirs.
mm,
And it seems to have sort of faded the last couple games. And I'm
mm,
not sure if it's because they've been focusing on other things or or what, but I do think that was really interesting because that was something, I mean, even Corey Close talked about. Like, she was like giving them credit
yep.
while also being like, I'm mad that they out hustled us for those rebounds.
yeah.
Like, she was pissed that, that they had been out rebounded by
Yeah.
a significantly smaller team, but it was because of that effort that they had put in after that LSU loss. And so I'm wondering where that rebounding effort has gone, because I think if it comes back, it's a big impact for this team.
It's a really
Now
good
I'm done.
That's
Happy?
a good point. Okay. That's again, like you both have a time crunch and so do I. So I think it's only fair.
Hey, Charles.
Hey, Jen.
Hey, how about them Huskies?
Ooh, purple and gold, baby.
Yeah. When are you going to watch all those away games, though?
All those away games. There are a lot of them, and I was hoping to come to Rough and Tumble because this is the home of Circling Seattle sports. If that's okay with you.
I think that's a great idea. Hope to see you all here.